right? I'm going to apologize because internet. Who invented that thing? Terrible idea when you want to try to do a live demo. So what I want to talk to you about is a developer's guide to managing infrastructure. And the core premise of my talk is that as an application developer, I shouldn't have to touch infrastructure. I mean, I don't know if anybody agrees with that, but I certainly held that opinion. And I don't hold it anymore. But the key thing about infrastructure, and when you look at it from a sort of developer's perspective, it's sometimes like a necessary evil. So when you think about sort of managing infrastructure as an app dev, are you going to be building Kubernetes clusters, configuring huge pieces in AWS, building platforms and things like that? Maybe, but I think more often than not, what you're really doing is managing small pieces of infrastructure that relate to your application and your core kind of period of work. So like things like you might need to create a database, or you might need to deploy an application. By learning how to kind of take ownership for managing that infrastructure, then actually it helps you to work faster because you don't need to submit a ticket. You don't need to wait for somebody in DevOps or something like that to be able to do it. You can just do it. And you can do it with code. So it should be familiar. And I'm going to show you two approaches, one which uses the HashiCorp configuration language and one which is going to use Typescript. So we can see kind of a couple of different approaches on this. Literally got 4 slides, but infrastructure as code, that's it. What this is going to do here is this is going to create a static site inside of DigitalOcean. So the demo app that I've built is something you can try on your own, something that you can run on like a free tier. But this is HCL, so it's kind of that medium that's halfway between sort of YAML and JSON from a readability and a programmatic sort of approach. And this is the traditional way that you would go about defining infrastructure with Terraform. Now, some folks were like, well, hey, I don't want to learn HCL. I don't want to use a configuration language. I'd like to be able to use programming code. So here's exactly the same example, but this time we're using TypeScript. You can use TypeScript, C#, Python, Go, Java. There's probably something else that I've forgotten, but you get that ability. If this is your preference, we'll have a look at both ways. So quickly, what are the benefits? The benefits are that you manage infrastructure in the same way as you do code. You have versioning, you have branching, managing different versions of your application in production and dev and test. And you've got the ability to work collaboratively. So you can work with people in your team to be able to define the infrastructure that your application needs. And because it's versioned as code, well, you've got that full history, that Git blame. Anybody love Git blame? You've got all of those things. This slide here is from the standard HashiCorp what is Terraform slide deck. And when they're kind of positioning Terraform to, I suppose, what would be traditionally sort of DevOps type crowd, this is what they're going to say. They're going to say increase agility, reduce risk, and reduce cost. From an application developer, I don't care about cost and I don't care about risk. That's somebody else's problem-ish. What I do care about is agility. And this, for me, is why Terraform is not just an application infrastructure team's tool. It's something that I can use as an app dev. Why trust it? It's been around for ages. There are a huge number of contributors. It's an incredibly popular tool. Whether you use Terraform or another infrastructure as code tool, doesn't matter. The key thing is just kind of embracing that capability. So let's go through, let's define some resources. Let's have a look at what this is going to look like. So I am just going to open up my file. Now, the example we kind of showed earlier on was this application. So we're going to look at HCL first, and then we'll look at some TypeScript. But this example here is going to create a static site inside of DigitalOcean. And I define it using this configuration language. It, in terms of the configuration, corresponds very closely to the DigitalOcean API. if you kind of look at the DigitalOcean API spec, most of those kind of features are there. And the reason that it does that is because it's designed to. So what Terraform does is it kind of works as an abstraction between the sort of your configuration definition and the cloud provider's APIs. So we use plugins to do this. Many of the plugins, in fact, most of them are written by folks like DigitalOcean. And it's just kind of it's a nice pluggable approach, which means Terraform can be used over a wide variety of use cases. So this is my application. Now, what I also need to be able to do is I need to define a provider. Now, what is a provider? So the provider is the bridge between Terraform and your configuration. Again, you can version providers, so things change in cloud providers' APIs. You want to kind of have the good practices where your configuration is matching a particular provider plugin. So we're going to version that. And that's pretty much all we need to do. Now, I have got my environment variables set, which have the DigitalOcean API token stored in my environment variables. The Terraform's going to pick it up. In the README, you can kind of look at how you kind of set those things up and go through. But to be able to create that infrastructure, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to run a couple of commands. The first command that I run is Terraform init. Terraform, and I'm going to spell it right, init. And what Terraform init does is it just downloads any of the plugins that I'm using. And then what I can also do is then run Terraform plan. Now, Terraform plan is telling me the changes that Terraform's going to make. So we can see here that it's going to create a static site, and it's going to populate some parameters, but we've also got a bunch of stuff here which is known after apply. So, things like the live URL. We don't know what that is until DigitalOcean has created it. And if we want to go and create that, Terraform, I really hate this keyboard, by the way, apply. It shows me the plan again because most people are going to kind of go straight through if you're using the CLI and just do an apply. I type yes. I hope my internet connection is going to work. And Terraform tells me it's going to create some resources. So if I refresh my DigitalOcean dashboard, you can see here that we now have static site HCL, which I've just defined with that Terraform configuration. You can see that it's currently building. If we check back on Terraform, you can see that Terraform is sort of in sync with that. It's not going to return until DigitalOcean has actually created and deployed our application. This should take about sort of 40 seconds or so. DigitalOcean says it's done. Terraform, in a second, will also say it's done. So we've now got that infrastructure created. And we test it, and we run, and we click the button, and we deployed our demo application to DigitalOcean static sites on their app platform, and we're going to run Street Fighter 2 in a web browser because I love Street Fighter 2. But it's very, very straightforward. That sort of two single pieces of configuration is a zero sort of ClickOps setup. And I've got the ability to do that. And that's, this is a working example. Now, the one thing that I just did there was that I clicked the link. Now, when you kind of look back at what Terraform was kind of showing us, it was saying like known after apply. And what you can also do inside of Terraform is you've got the concept of an output variable. So an output will allow me to get one of those computed properties from the DigitalOcean API, and I can just use it here. So let's write this. I'm just going to do a Terraform apply again. Come on, I don't want this. Terraform apply. Now, Terraform has detected that there's no changes that I've made to the actual infrastructure resource. It's only kind of changing to the output, so it doesn't recreate anything for me. So it's, I can keep running Terraform apply, and as my configuration hasn't changed, nothing happens. But now I've got that URL there. Okay. So let's kind of look at a couple of other little features. And whether you're using HCL or whether you're using the CDK, CDK, it all kind of applies the same. The key thing around configuration is you want an element of sort of dynamism. You want to kind of make things dynamical and in some ways reusable. So we can use a variable, and a variable allows us to kind of have configurable properties for our Terraform code. So I'm going to define a variable here called Cloudflare subdomain, which we'll get to in a bit, but it has a default value, and I can also override that value. Now, to use it, what I can do is I can either use it like this, where I'm just going to do var Cloudflare subdomain, and that will directly kind of assign to the property name from the subdomain, or I can actually use it, interpolate it inside of name. So we're going to look at that like this. So we're going to go over here, and we're going to use the interpolation syntax, var.cloudflare subdomain, and then we're going to save that. Now, if we, again, run Terraform apply, wow, I really hate this keyboard. Because I've made a change to the configuration, Terraform's now telling me that the property name is being updated from static site HCL to static site main HCL. So I'm going to say yes. Terraform is going to go, it's going to make the changes in DigitalOcean, and we've got that complete sort of workflow. Very, very easy to kind of make those changes and kind of go through that process. Again, that's just going to take a couple of seconds to complete. Now, there we go, so it's done. Certain resources can be changed, certain ones can't. It very much depends on the underlying resource, not necessarily a sort of a Terraform dependency. But if I want to be able to kind of dynamically change that variable, then what I can do is I can do something like Terraform, and I can do apply, and I can set a var, use the var flag, and I can say Cloudflare subdomain equals flag. Now, if I press enter there, I've now overridden the default variable, and I can kind of set that there to the flag. So it kind of gives me ability to have sort of some programmatic control over the Terraform configuration, which makes it reusable. And that's really important. Now, let's kind of look at how you can kind of go about doing these things. But instead of doing it with sort of the HCL, we're going to look at how, the same example, but we're going to look at it with Typescript. So let's look at this. Now, I've already bootstrapped the project because it needs to install some NPMs, and I didn't want to kind of do that because it's going to take a little bit of time. But to kind of bootstrap a new Terraform project, if you want to use something like Typescript, all you have to do, well, let's see if we can show you. CDK, let's look at test. Let's just clear this folder. And let's do CDK, TF, init. So we're going to run this command. It's going to bootstrap the project for us, set us up with all of the different bits and pieces. I can choose from a number of different languages. And it's going to kind of go through and it'll kind of bootstrap all of those things, ask me some questions. And ultimately, what you end up with is this project here. So this is the kind of the bootstrapped default for Typescript. So let's go through and create exactly the same example. But this time, let's define those things with Typescript. So the first thing that we need is a provider. So we have the provider block in exactly the same way as we had in HCL, but this time it's now a sort of a Typescript class. And what we kind of also wanted was that variable. So we can define a variable. And again, instead of it being sort of a code block, we're just defining and setting that as a kind of a Typescript class and object. And then let's have a look at what our application looks like. So our application looks like this. So it's very similar, but again, you're using Typescript. If that's your preference, this is the capability that there is. So finally, let's look at the output. And there's kind of our output. So if we kind of look here at the HCL version, that's what it looks like. And then we look here at the Typescript version, that's what it looks like. So it's similar, but not completely. Now, what I need to kind of do is also add the imports. And the imports are literally just, again, TypeScript definitions. And what I'm going to do, just comment that one out because I'm not using that right now, is save that. So now we've got exactly the same application, but defined in TypeScript. And using a very similar process, we can go and create those resources. So CDK, TF, deploy. So I'm not using the Terraform command directly. CDK is going to kind of, under the background, it's going to convert all of that TypeScript for me into the correct Terraform objects. I get the very similar plan there that I got the last time. I hit approve. It's going to go through and deploy in exactly the same way as you saw earlier. It's going to create that resource inside of DigitalOcean for me. And we can see that just happening here. And there we go. So we're not going to wait for this to complete. We'll kind of come back to this in a moment, because I think one of the really sort of interesting things about Terraform is the capability to use it with multiple providers inside of the same configuration. Because what I want to do is I want to deploy my app to DigitalOcean, but I want to have a Cloudflare worker, which is going to allow me to proxy requests through to it, and then I can run it through Cloudflare's WAF and things like that. So in order to kind of do that, what you can do is you can actually use multiple providers inside of your configuration. So if I kind of import the Cloudflare provider block, and if I then go through and start creating some Cloudflare resources. So the first thing that I need, oops, I'm missing my Cloudflare provider. Always important to have that provider block there. We've looked at resources, but there's another element of Terraform, and that's data types. So a resource is something which is very closely aligned to a CRUD operation, so create, read, update, delete, whereas a data element is something which you can use as a kind of a read-only resource. So what I need in order to be able to do things like create a domain name and provision my worker in Cloudflare is my zone ID. So I can actually use the Cloudflare zone data block to be able to fetch that zone ID. So let me just set the name there. So the name is going to be demo.gs, which is my domain name that I've got configured inside of Cloudflare. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to create some Cloudflare resources. So I want to create a DNS record because we're going to create a Cloudflare worker. So we need a dummy DNS record, which is going to point at the worker. Then we're going to create a worker script. So these are all Cloudflare resources, but they're defined just using the CDK. Now, the worker script here is actually using some special functions. So template file and trim prefix. And the reason for this is one of the features that I really like about Terraform, and that is I can actually have templatized config. So this is my Cloudflare worker. All it does is proxies requests to DigitalOcean and returns the response. Now, I don't know what the host name is because I haven't created the DigitalOcean application yet. So what I can do with Terraform is I can use this template, and at runtime, Terraform will automatically substitute the DigitalOcean application host name for the placeholder there. And it can do that because Terraform understands dependency. So because I've had that hard dependency there, Terraform knows it needs to create the DigitalOcean application before it creates the Cloudflare worker script. And you don't need to worry about that order and dependencies. Terraform just works it out automatically for you through this approach. Just because I'm using the app live URL there, that's all Terraform needs is a hint to be able to understand the order and dependency of resources. So let me just add the import here, which imports the functions package, which contains, the functions class, which contains all of the bits and pieces. And we've got that running. And let's just move this because unlike HCL, where we're dealing with, this needs to be okay. And we can kind of go through and let's just complete this configuration. So we're going to define the script. We're going to define a worker root. And we're going to define some additional outputs. So these are literally just DigitalOcean and Cloudflare resources, which are defined using Typescript inside of the CDK. So let's just put this in here. I'm going to save this. And I wasn't paying attention, so I'm having to move a few things around. There we go. So now we're going to apply it. CDK, TF, deploy. Now what's happening is Terraform is going to raise an error. And that wasn't expected, but it's telling me that it can't find path, and that is because I haven't imported path. Where's path? There we go. So we are going to save that, and we're going to run this again. We're going to detect those changes. It's going to tell us that I've made a typo, haven't I? Honestly, whoever invented these Apple keyboards did it so make me look like a complete buffoon. So Terraform is telling me the changes. It's going to add 3 resources. So again, it isn't deleting anything. It's detected that there are changes. It's going to go through. It's now going to start deploying those things. If we take a look over in Cloudflare, you can kind of see, if I just refresh my dashboard here, that in our DNS setting, we have our main TS. If we go to our worker routes, we have our worker route there with production. And if I refresh this window here, you can see that it's all been deployed to production. And that's pretty much, in a nutshell, it. So the repo, which you can look at, is available to play around with. Again, all of the resources that I've created and provisioned for you are all designed to work on the free tier of either DigitalOcean or Cloudflare. You can check those out. There's examples there in Go, in Python, HCL, Typescript. So you'll be able to see the difference, compare and contrast. Thank you for listening. We're kind of a little short on time because I had a bit of a nightmare, but I hope this is useful. Go and write some infrastructure. Thank you.
Really good stuff. Really, really good stuff. Anyone having a question for Nick? Yeah, there you go. Got a mic coming your way.
Hi, one question from my side. So Terraform is abstraction over provider native language like CloudFormation for AWS. And now we have another layer of abstraction like Java or TypeScript.
Yes.
So do we have a risk of unsupported features and how to solve it?
So Terraform is not an abstraction over something like CloudFormation. Terraform interacts directly with AWS's APIs. So in terms of the layers, what you have is the Terraform provider and then AWS's API. When you start looking at the languages in the CDK, it uses the same provider that the HCL version does. So all it's really doing is converting TypeScript as a language into HCL. Well, not quite, but in essence, that's all it's doing. So anything that's supported with the main provider and HCL is automatically supported with the CDK plugin. So there's pretty much zero risk of that happening. We build and deploy everything at exactly the same time. So whenever there's a AWS release, the CDK gets it exactly the same day.
We have a question? Hold on a sec, we'll get the mic for you.
Hi, can we get the HCL code from the JavaScript? Like, can we get that mid-step somewhere generated so that we can see it, or is it like under the hood hidden somewhere?
So it's not designed to let you to be able to do that. In the CDK, there is a sort of an output folder, but what it's really kind of doing is it's kind of converting things down into JSON. It doesn't actually sort of allow you to do something like write something in TypeScript, run a sort of an intermediary step which generates HCL. I mean, theoretically, there's probably a way you could kind of go about, doing that, because HCL can be converted back to and from JSON, but it's not something that we actually support as such.
Anyone else? Thank you so much, Nick. Great stuff.